Growing up as a white person in South Africa during apartheid, the privilege served you. You just follow blindly. Nelson Mandela, we believe that he was a terrorist.
How on earth did you end up working with and for Nelson Mandela?
I was spectacularly ill-equipped for the job. Some Afrikaner people, like to call me a sellout because I worked for the so-called enemy. He would say to me, I miss prison. He taught people to respect one another, even in the most difficult of situations. We are surrounded by politicians who suffer from this self-serving political tunnel vision. Most of these wars are driven by men. Where are the women's voices in all of that? No one is beyond redemption. The solutions that we are looking for in these conflict-stricken areas, the solution in all of that for me is we need some.
If you've been listening to Lead on Purpose for any length of time, you'll know that I'm a massive fan of Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa. And I've spent a long time studying him, reading about him, meeting his family members. And look, an opportunity has come up recently, and today you're about to step in and experience that opportunity with me. My partner's parents in South Africa said, "Hey, you should really interview Zelda la Grange." And I said, "Please tell me more about Zelda la Grange." Well, she was the private secretary to Nelson Mandela for almost 2 decades. What an amazing human she is. She's written books. She's traveled the world sharing messages about Nelson and how he led. And so today, you're going to get to sit in and hear a conversation that Zelda and I had very recently. And we're releasing this on the week that we celebrate Mandela Day. A very, very important day. And for those that are looking around the world and seeing injustice and seeing war, we need to remember what Mandela was about, and that was about forgiveness, connection, but also standing up for what we believe in. So for whatever it is you believe in, please continue to stand up and lead your life on purpose by doing that. But for now, let's listen to Zelda la Grange. The Lead on Purpose podcast is made possible by our generous sponsor, NZ Mortgages. You can check them out at nzmortgages.co.nz. Zelda, a huge welcome to the Lead on Purpose podcast.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I've been waiting for this for quite some time. I said to my team, look, we really need to have Zelda on the show because I've spent so much of my life, both in childhood and adulthood, really trying to understand Nelson Mandela, see what he did in his country, the amazing things he achieved. And I've been reading and researching, and when I seen that, hey, you're one of the world's top speakers on Nelson Mandela and what's going on in South Africa, I thought, I really want you on the show. And I want to go deep on your personal experiences with Nelson, and also how that shaped you and shaped your views of South Africa, of race, of apartheid. I'd love to really get into that. And I think at this time, right now, as we record, obviously this has been a very interesting time for the ANC in South Africa. This is the first time, I think, in 30 years that they will have to go into a coalition. And also when we look at things in Ukraine and Gaza, there's a lot of unrest. So I think this is really timely for us to have a conversation. You, more than anyone I know, have spent so much time in proximity with someone who was the father of forgiveness. He was someone who could look at both sides, someone who was willing to compromise, someone who was willing to work with anyone to try and move forward for equality and peace. So I want to start at the beginning. How on earth did you end up working with and for Nelson Mandela? Where did you grow up, and what were the beliefs that you guys had, and how did it end up that you sat alongside Nelson?
So, James, yes, I grew up in Apartheid South Africa, very conservative community, no connection to politics, no interest in my family to politics, a middle-class existence. But growing up as a white person in South Africa during apartheid, the privilege served you. So, my parents both had jobs, which on the other side, for the black majority, that was not the case. We had access to good medical facilities. Black people did not. We had access to good public education. Black people did not have that. So from the start, I mean, the fact that I was registered during birth That was something that immediately put me in a privileged position in South Africa. So if something or a system serves your privilege, then you don't ask questions, you just follow blindly. Remember, it was also there was a lot of censorship. Everything on all levels of society was censored by the apartheid regime. So when you went to church on Sundays, your religion was used in support of apartheid. So why would you ask questions if you did not consider the other side? So from a young age, you also get taught and you believe that you are of superior race. We all got brought up by black women in our homes, which clothed us and fed us. We all had nannies. They carried us on their backs. But regardless of your age, you start learning that because you are white, you are the superior, you are the master in that relationship. So very little respect for fellow human beings, little respect for seniority, and you get indoctrinated on all levels, and you buy into the system. When Nelson Mandela was released in 1990 was really the first time I took note of him. We all, fear was a very big part of apartheid. We were brought up to fear everything and anything that looks different, prays different, believes different, lives different than us. We got to know of Nelson Mandela, and we believed that he was a terrorist. Now he was released, and the Afrikaner community, the people responsible for apartheid, expected revenge. Despite all of that, I applied for a job in his office purely because of a logistical arrangement and because it was the job that was advertised also advertised the possibility of spending 6 months of the year in Cape Town. Now, our conversation before we went online, you've seen Cape Town. It is a beautiful part of our country, and even South Africans at a young age, you dream of ending up in Cape Town. And so those two simple things were the things that attracted me to this job I wanted to apply for in President Mandela's office. Of course, it was not directly working for him. And then on the day of the interview, I was at the right place at the right time when his secretary entered, the president's secretary, and she wanted an assistant. So I was at the right place at the right time, as I said. And, we were introduced. And after the interview concluded, they asked me whether I would be interested in a job working for her. And that's really how my career started. I worked for the private secretary. And that's how my journey interjected with that of Nelson Mandela.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And within your own family circles or friendship circles, was there any kind of a challenge or criticism about you going and working for this new president who was once considered a terrorist?
Absolutely. It was frowned upon in those years, for us to step over, and even to this day, some Afrikaner people, like to call me a sellout because I worked for the so-called enemy. Although, I mean, it's 30 years later. Some people, as you know, have never moved on. But there was a lot of I lost a lot of friends when they saw that I was really invested in this job as well. And it was a simple thing. My parents brought me up with to follow your conviction, to follow to when you work, do everything, do your best. Be dedicated and loyal and committed in your job. And those are the things that I did and I was young as well. I was energetic, and that worked for President Mandela. So, a relationship started developing because of my commitment and my availability and my energy and so on. And that was very, very difficult for Afrikaner people specifically to accept. But as people grew fonder of President Mandela, that also changed, and people, my experiences with President Mandela also changed other people's perspectives on life and on the world. So at the end of the day, the things that I found very hurtful in the beginning was this ostracizing by my own community. A lot of people have come by and have changed in the process, and it has had an impact on my own community. The fact that I worked for him, it has also had a great impact on people, just showing them that we can work together.
And we need to, now more than ever, what's happening globally, like we need to work together. I'd love to know what it felt like when you first met him, that first meeting when you guys connected. What was he like? How did he treat you?
It was a life-changing experience, just that first meeting, because the person that I found in front of me was completely the opposite of, what was propagated to us about him. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to be resentful. And he was completely the opposite. And he spoke in my home language, in Afrikaans. Of course, he studied Afrikaans in prison. It was the language of apartheid, the language of the oppressor. But he studied Afrikaans to negotiate with the Afrikaner or the apartheid regime. So when he spoke to me in Afrikaans, it destroyed my defenses immediately, and it opened me up to this journey of discovery, wanting to know what are the principles, because none of that, we must remember Google didn't exist those days.
Yeah.
You couldn't just Google what was Nelson Mandela all about or what were his principles. But that meeting and that first day opened up a journey of discovery for me. And I found then that the values and the morals and the principles that he stood for were things that I wanted to align to as a human being: equality, democracy, dignity for all people. So it was a life-changing experience, just that first moment.
I bet it was. That's incredible. And those morals and values, what were the ones that really stood out for you that you thought, like, that really is the epitome of what President Mandela is about?
James, it's definitely, if I had to pick one thing, it is respect. Respect for people, irrespective of their ideology, their religion, their status, their education, wealth, all of those things he removed from the human being when he connected with you. There was a kindness about him, but that utmost respect, non-judgmental way of looking at a human being and inviting you to almost in a way expose your humanity and to be exactly who you are without, accepting your complexity as a human being. So that thing about respect is what stood out for me. Even in negotiations, when he negotiated for the Burundi peace process in Central Africa, how he taught people to respect one another, even in the most difficult of situations, is definitely, I think, a lesson that we can all take a leaf off from him, especially in a time where we are so troubled now, struggling with diversity and differences. He focused on what brings us apart as human beings rather than what divides us. And I think that was his strength as a leader and as a humanitarian.
Yeah, you can really see it in his speeches, in the books that have been written about him and that he's wrote himself. Like, that's just a massive part of who he is. And for all these years prior to becoming his private secretary, you'd had this belief system around the opposite race. And that's for years and years, it was entrenched. How long did it take before you started to actually go, no, this is all wrong? Like, I can see it totally different. Did it happen in a day, a week, a month? Did it take many years?
James, yes, it took, I think it took a couple of years. And first, let me issue a disclaimer. I don't think as human beings we are at any point in our life completely changed. A friend of mine adopted a little black boy, a white friend of mine adopted a little black boy. And she said to me one day that she battles racial bias every single day. And, I was shocked at first, but it gave me a view on my own experiences as well. I continue to battle those things every day. So it's not as if there was a beginning, a starting date and an ending date when I said I was completely changed. I battle with things still every single day, but I think President Mandela taught us all to challenge these things within ourselves and to confront them and to keep trying. So in the beginning, I think when I met the president's private secretary in 1994, who was a black lady, I think the wiring of my brain was immediately challenged when she walked into the room and she wore the most beautiful dress. And I thought to myself, and it's her office attire, business attire, and I thought to myself, well, this dress that this lady is wearing is more expensive than anything my mother owns. And then she speaks English, and her English, which is also not her first language, but her English is much better than mine. So in a very strange way, in that moment, I think my prejudice and my bias was challenged immediately. And that was the first time. And then when I found myself in this environment and I realized, but I am the one that knows least about this office and about this environment and about this, the political environment and the history of my own country. I know a very one-sided history. When I came to terms with that, I realized how much growth I needed. So I had the fortune or the privilege to have worked with people, incredible people within President Mandela's office that really took my hand and taught me and mentored me and showed me the way by introducing me to the history of the other side of the history of my own country. So it was a process that took a considerable amount of time. But once I realized, the values and the principles that people fought for in my country were things that I could align with. Once I realized that, it was much easier and much faster, a faster process for me to discover really, or to challenge my bias and my prejudice. So it was a process, as I say, that it started obviously that first day when I met the secretary, and then throughout the following 2 years, I would say it was a very intense process when I also had to go and have conversations with my religious leaders to ask them, how did you allow the Bible and the Word of God to be manipulated in support of apartheid? So it was a very intense process, I would say, the first 2 years. But it's an ongoing process, and it's still today. I check myself constantly. I think I'm a master at second guessing myself, but always continuously just aligning my thinking and my thoughts with that measured and measured way of thinking of President Mandela's.
It's incredible. I want to thank you for actually sharing it like that, because I think a lot of us struggle to put the spotlight on our own biases and our own prejudices. I think we all like to think to a certain degree that we're all really great people with no biases, but actually we have all got them, and they're very subconscious, and they've kind of been, as you say, indoctrinated, like bred into us by the people that surrounded us, whether it's at school, at home, at our churches, whatever it might be. I just think it says a lot about you to say, hey, I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to get better. I'm still trying to figure it out. And honestly, I think we're all on that journey. And I'm sure that the listener listening right now can really resonate with your journey. Now, I imagine there would have been challenges. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to say, in closing to that question, is I think, President Mandela was not without bias and prejudice himself. A simple example is we had a bodyguard that worked with us for a few years, and he had a very English name and an Afrikaans surname, or a surname that's very common in Afrikaans. And throughout the bodyguard's tenure with us, President Mandela kept speaking Afrikaans to him, assuming that he's Afrikaans. And every other day I would remind him, but this person is not Afrikaans speaking, he's English speaking actually. So it's a very innocent way, but also to show you that we all have that. And, as a white person, I realize that I will battle my own prejudice and bias until the day I die. It's not something that you'll ever say I'm completely converted. Because I worked for President Mandela, I can't claim, to have completely changed. And I think President Mandela made it easy also for us to deal with those because of his kind and gentle and graceful way in dealing with his own prejudice and bias.
Thank you for sharing that. And was there any moments that you found quite challenging? Were there moments that you were under the pump, that was a bit chaotic? How were those moments when you were working with President Mandela?
James, well, that was every day. When I published my memoir, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela, in 2014, the Sunday Times in England wrote a review, and they said I was spectacularly ill equipped for the job, and that's the absolute truth. I really battled. I didn't have the background, as I said, I didn't have the political know-how. I wasn't, although I had a national diploma to be an executive secretary, this environment was very, very different to what you can be prepared for anywhere in life. I was especially after he retired in 1999, when he retired from public office, he could choose one person from the government office to remain working with him. And then I was the only private secretary that remained with him. And overnight, our infrastructure just disappeared. So, our support structure was gone. And suddenly, I'm thrown into this environment where I have to deal with the media. I have to deal with protocol. I have to deal with, negotiations with foreign governments and, President Mandela's foreign visits. I have to do logistics by myself, of this person and trying to move Nelson Mandela across international airport. And without the support really of our foreign officers, which it's not fair to say they weren't there, but I was very much left to deal with things on my own. So it was very difficult. The pressure from the international world. Nelson Mandela's stature didn't decrease the day after he retired. To the contrary, people just thought that he would now be more available to the world. So it was absolute chaos. And I call those the crazy years because, sometimes I really worked 24 hours of the day because you also had the pressure from the outside world. And those were the days before emails. So you physically had to type a response to every person that contacted the office, and you had to fax them. And that sometimes, during the day, I had to attend to President Mandela and be present in his meetings and, be with him all the time, move with him. And overnight, then I had to respond to all these thousands of people that wanted a piece of him. So it was a very, very difficult and stressful time to absorb that pressure and to shield him from that kind of pressure. So, that was very challenging. I must be honest. I wasn't schooled for it and I wasn't prepared for it. But it was a wonderful learning journey. And I still look back today and I hardly recognize, the person that I was in those years because I don't know, I was in crisis mode all the time. So, it was a difficult environment to work in and also trying to please people. I had to accept that my job was not a popularity contest, and I had to do what he ultimately wanted his schedule to look like. He wanted his space, what was physically possible of him, and what he wanted to align himself with. So you are the most unpopular person having to say no to everyone. So that was that was difficult for me because, people, I'm just a messenger and we all know, the cliche around the messenger don't shoot the messenger, but that's a role you played. And ultimately I had to keep him, his interest, was always, top of my agenda.
I bet you're the ultimate gatekeeper. And I think that's important for any leader to have someone that's incredible that can say no and can create boundaries. But the fact that he picked you out of everyone after he left office, it speaks volumes. So those years that he was in office and you were starting to understand how the world worked in his world, how do you feel you built that relationship with him to the point where he wanted you and trusted you to be his private secretary moving on?
Well, it was definitely, as I said, James, it was my availability. I
Mm.
was very young, I was 24 years, 25, 26 years of age. And you know the energy that you have at that age. So I was completely committed to the job. I also felt that because of my past and what I represented as an Afrikaner, with being, having been responsible for apartheid, I wanted to commit to the job and really, make sure that he succeeds as a president. So I wanted to do, in whatever small way, contribute to that success. And my availability to him 24 hours of the day, the fact that I was able to immediately attend to his needs. We shared a similar sense of urgency because of my age, because of my energy. I didn't have any dependents where my peers in the office all had lives outside the office, but my job was my everything. And that commitment and loyalty are the things that really attracted him. And you get used to, especially when you're an elderly person, you get used to someone then who's always available and who always, prioritizes your needs. So that strengthened the relationship, and there's a trust that starts building because he always knew that I had his best interest at heart. There's many situations in which that is tested, and so that builds trust between people. And then the amount of time also that we spent following his retirement, because I was now the only person traveling with him and being around him every single day. The amount of time that we spent together then creates a very different kind of relationship. So I think, in the later years, I considered him like a grandfather, and he considered me an honorary granddaughter. And that was very special to me, that, it wasn't forced, and it wasn't in any way superficial. It was a very natural process because of that dependency that through time, that started through time.
100%. And it's interesting. When I read about President Mandela, I think of someone who's very measured, someone who's a deep thinker, someone who's calm under pressure. Now, am I right in thinking that, or were there examples where he wasn't that?
Look, he was not a one-dimensional person. He could be very stubborn, but at the same time kind. He could be very strict but compassionate. So he had this ultimate control of his emotions. I think that is very important. And sometimes I picture a kind of a cartoon where he is this calm figure, and at the back, I'm the one, just killing all the fires. So, I think by nature he was that measured and balanced person in everything that he did. Very disciplined, and that was those are things that were taught to him at a very young age because of his tradition, because of his Xhosa tradition, because of what his parents, the values his parents instilled in him. Those things, started at a very young age, and then before he went to prison, he wanted to be a boxer. So the discipline of that, practicing that sport, just strengthened those things, and that complete control. And then prison, he had a lot of time to think. And sometimes he would say to me, I miss prison. And I would say to him, don't say that, you shouldn't say things like that. And he would laugh at me and say, I miss time to think. Because it's something that we take for granted, having the time to think. Because of this crazy world in which we live, in this fast-paced world, how many of us really take the time to think about our problems, to think about challenges? Because, we just keep going. But he had the time, and he always made the time. And even after his release and during his presidency, he always had time to contemplate. And I think, that discipline of the mind and the emotions is something that's admirable, and something that we may need in leaders, and even with ourselves today.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. It's very interesting. I talk a lot about think time, and I really love think time. And almost every day, there's 30 to 40 minutes of just time where I'm thinking, and people are like, "Are you crazy? What, are you losing your mind?" I'm like, "Well, no, there's so much going on and so many
Correct.
dependents. We need time to think." So
Mm.
you talked about his discipline of thinking. What other disciplines did you see in him that were kind of regular, recurring patterns?
Well, he wasn't rigid in thinking, but he was very rigid in other things in life. The discipline with the schedule, how he lived a very healthy life, how he was very set on doing exercise every day, his eating habits, all of those things, were very rigid, because that was part of the discipline of the person. And then he was meticulous in small things, in order, bringing about order in everything in life. Sometimes I helped him to take his shoes off when he was sitting in his favorite chair, or wherever we were traveling. And I would take the shoes off and just put them next to his chair, and then he would call me back and say, "Now I must come and correct the shoes," meaning that they should be, neatly stacked. So, that is a very simple example of just how his brain works. In everything there had to be order and measure and clarity. So it's not only in his political life, but also in his private life, or his private time. And that is something that came through very, very clearly.
Yeah, I think when there's order as an individual, when you're leading others, there's more clarity around what we do. Um, when he got to the end of his presidency, did he share with you how he felt about what he was able to achieve in that time?
Look, I think overall, he set out to stabilize South Africa, and to avert a civil war, to ensure that there was a smooth transition in South Africa, and he achieved that. And that was his main agenda, allowing people to see the future. He was able to create that vision with people in South Africa, and to get the buy-in of the population through symbolism and so on. So I think in that he succeeded completely. I think what worried him at the end of his presidency, in those years, was that the AIDS pandemic was taking off, and that he did not attend to enough of that, advocating for in terms of behavior and so on. And then education was a big worry to him. The fact that we couldn't fast track education and service delivery of clinics and health services to people in rural areas. So during his presidency, I think in 1998, he started this project, building schools and clinics, and convincing business people across South Africa to privately build schools and clinics to fast track those services to people, especially in rural, or specifically in rural areas in South Africa. And by the end, when he no longer could do this, um, because of health reasons and age and so on, he ended up building over 100 schools and clinics, through business, of the intervention of business, of course. So the things that he couldn't do during his presidency, he attended to during retirement. And I think at the end of his life, he looked back, and I hope I think he was satisfied with what he had achieved, and what he was able to contribute at that stage of his life.
Yeah, he should be. It's quite phenomenal. And I often think about someone like Nelson Mandela and what he did for his nation, for the world. And it always leaves me wondering, what was it like to be in his family? Did he make time for family? Did he have enough family time? Did he ever say to you, "I want more time with my family"? Were there boundaries put in place that you had to enforce to make sure that he could get that? How did that all unfold and roll?
Look, when I met him in 1994, his family was very fractured.
Mm.
you can imagine being released from prison after being absent from your family for 27 years or for 27 years. It's very, very difficult to repair relationships after being absent that long. And then when he was released, he had this burden of, and he didn't see it as a burden, but saw it as a calling of negotiating a settlement in South Africa. So his attention was immediately diverted to politics again. So there was very little time for him really to mend the relationships and to build that sense of family. When he married Mrs. Graça Machel in 1998, a few years later, I would say in 2002, she was actually the one that intervened with the family and brought all these different parts together. For them to spend, important dates together, Christmas, New Year, birthdays, and so on. Because people's lives have also, it went on during his prison time. People had their own lives, and to try and bring that all together. And then you are dealing with 3 different families because he was married 3 times. So to bring all those different sides together was quite a challenging task. So people in his family had access to him at home all the time, and it was also because of his availability. He traveled a lot. He was hardly ever at home after his presidency. So he had very little family time. But at least Mrs. Machel made sure that the important times, the family times, Easter and so on, that they did spend all those days together.
It's incredible. Yeah, I imagine she would have been quite instrumental in the background. And I don't know, my take on Nelson is he's a fun-loving human as well. Like to have a bit of fun and quite a bit of humor. Did you get to experience any of that?
Oh yes, very much so. Because he could also speak Afrikaans. It was also a kind of a secret weapon. So sometimes he would comment when we're in meetings. He would make a comment in Afrikaans to me, because of always trying to lift the environment. Always trying to break down tension and so on. So he had a very, very good sense of humor, and he always looked for humor in situations, as I say, to make people feel at ease. And see the lighter side of life. So he had these very standard things that he would say to people whenever he met him, and that broke down their defenses as well. Being able to relax because he also knew that because of who he was, he understood his power very well. And he knew that he had to use humor to make people feel at ease and open up to him. It was always present. A bit of humor was always present. And as you say, fun, maybe not fun as you and I understand fun, but, always seeing the lighter side in things in life. In the most challenging situations, I would be, for instance, I would have a very different, things would go wrong. And logistics won't work out, and then we would be stranded somewhere, or there would be a huge delay, and I would get very worked up. And then he would calm me down and say, you know what, these things make life interesting. So, always finding something to say to make one, see things in a different perspective as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What did you learn about forgiveness from Nelson Mandela?
I believe that for one to live by moral compass as he did, you have to live with compassion and empathy. And that is a very big part of forgiveness, being able to show a person empathy and compassion, not necessarily blindly forgiving them, but understanding, where the person has erred. I think compassion for me was a very, very big part of who Nelson Mandela was. Understanding, as I said earlier, the complexity of a human being, admitting that we are all human beings with vices and virtues, and ultimately believing that no one is beyond redemption. Nelson Mandela wanted to destroy a system in South Africa without destroying people in the process. And I think for me, that says everything about his forgiveness, his sense of of realizing that holding onto resentment or not being able to forgive someone else is like drinking poison and hoping the enemy would die. That is something that he often said. So for me, forgiveness was a big part in also in showing, or showing compassion and empathy was a big part for me of showing people that we can forgive. We don't necessarily have to accept the narrative, and as I say, agree with someone, but we are able to show empathy and compassion to people in any circumstances.
Such great insights and wisdom. Thank you. Now, Zelda, did you step foot on Robben Island?
Many occasions, many occasions, yes.
What was your very first trip, if you can remember back to that? How did you feel stepping on the Robben Island and walking around and seeing the prison cells and the conditions? How did it make you feel about what Nelson and his fellow prisoners went through?
I must be honest with you, James, it made me angry. It made me very, very angry because I saw this incredible human being. And when I say human being, I say it with purpose because he was not a saint. He had vices and virtues like all of us, but this kindness in him, despite his past. I saw this human being and I got to know this human being. And then I went into his prison cell. And, he was a bit taller than me and I'm 176. So he was, a bit taller than me. But when he stretched out his hands and feet, he would touch both ends of the prison cell. How do you survive that for 18 years of the 27 years in prison? For 18 years being locked up in that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock tomorrow morning in that cold prison cell with just cement, concrete everywhere, without proper bedding, without proper warmth. How do you survive that? And it made me angry, really looking at that and realizing that, I wondered, how do you remain hopeful? How do you not give up in circumstances like that? And I realized that, the only way to overcome that and the only way to remain hopeful was to focus on his hopes and not his fears, and to focus on his colleagues in prison, to focus on what brought them together and not what drove them apart. So I think there's very important lessons in surviving something and in environment like that for us as human beings to overcome challenges in the face of adversity. What do we do? How do we remain hopeful? For me, it was at first anger until I was able to focus on these things and trying to unpuzzle. How do you survive that? How do you remain hopeful?
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I found Robben Island a very emotional day because I obviously read about it and thought about it, and for a long time I finally went there with my partner Caroline, and wow, it was very difficult and to walk around and witness and try and understand what it would have felt like. Very inhumane, just shocking, really, but really incredible on the other side of it to see Nelson come out the other end with compassion, with forgiveness, with the desire to reunite everyone. And so I guess post-presidency, he steps away from that. You and him are working together. He didn't stop. Like, he kept growing and building. His legacy lives on forever. So what are some of the things that you were a part of that actually were established post-presidency that still live on today, that still have his message resonating?
So the Nelson Mandela Foundation, I was one of the founding staff members of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It is a center of memory where all Mr. Mandela's memorabilia is home, but also a center of dialogue where people, when difficult issues occur, it's a safe space where people get together and discuss and contemplate, issues. So that's the one thing. The other thing that I'm particularly proud of is the establishment of Mandela Day. During his 90th birthday, we hosted a 46664 concert in Hyde Park for his 90th birthday. in support of the AIDS campaign. And during this birthday, he got many different birthday notes from celebrities and, people all across the world, celebrities and ordinary people, I must say. And one of these birthday notes, or the note was from Bono, the U2 lead singer. And Bono wrote a beautiful note to say, thank you for your commitment to the world. I will work very hard to make your birthday, the 18th of July, a public holiday across the world and a day of service for people to pay tribute to you. And we looked at this note and we realized that, there's an idea in this. So we went to the United Nations and asked them to declare the 18th of July International Nelson Mandela Day across the world, which they accepted. At the end, they all voted for it, and it's now on calendars around the world, where we ask people to do 67 minutes of good on his birthday on the 18th of July. Of course, it's not a public holiday, and the intention was never to have a holiday, but really, just to spend some time. He dedicated 67 years of his life as an active citizen, trying to improve lives of other people. So the least we are asking is, in his honor, spend 67 minutes on that day, doing any kind of goodwill. It doesn't have to be in a controlled way. It doesn't have to be with a big charity. It can be, just making peace with your neighbor. But Mr. Mandela lived a life by which he realized that if he just touches one person's life every day, he could change the world. And that is the concept that we wanted to bring home to people, is if you just do one good deed every day, you can change your own environment. It is within your power. You don't have to be a person of position or, a politician or with great wealth. You can change your environment, but by paying forward this kind of goodwill. So I was very proud of the establishment of Mandela Day, and that across the world today, people still observe that day. And I hope it will go from strength to strength, and that people will, especially in difficult times that we live in now, people will, on his birthday, just try, the smallest kind of action towards creating a just and equal society around them.
Yeah, I hope they do, because we really do need it more now than ever. And imagine if President Mandela was sitting with you and I right now, and he could see what was unfolding in the world, the Ukraine, Gaza, and lots of other places. What advice do you think he might share with you and I to pass on to those leaders of those countries?
Look, all the solutions that we are looking for in these conflict-stricken areas, all the solution in all of that, for me, is we need selfless leadership. I think, people, we live in a time and an age where people, we are surrounded by politicians who suffer from the self-serving political tunnel vision. Whilst Nelson Mandela's life was one of selfless service to humanity. We need people who make decisions that's in the best interest of everyone, not only in their best interest. They don't only serve their best interest. We need people who are willing to negotiate, people who are willing to compromise. Because, none of these problems, we can go on with wars for years and years and years, but unless leaders emerge from this to say the only way forward for us is to negotiate and to find a way, a peaceful way. South Africa was on knife's edge of civil war on many, many occasions. But through Nelson Mandela's leadership, he inspired ordinary people to also choose peace over conflict. And it's not only the leaders, we as ordinary people have to choose that continuously as well. As you mentioned earlier, or as we spoke earlier, South Africa has just been through an election, a watershed election in our history, where the majority party, the ANC, Mr. Mandela's party, lost the majority in parliament. Or the outright majority. They still have a majority, but they won't be able to govern with the numbers they got. But ordinary South Africans made sure that we had a peaceful election because they are inspired by our history. Ordinary people choosing peace over conflict. Mr. Mandela knew that, despite our challenges that we, or in certain circumstances and incidents in our history, he was faced with the choice: do we go to war with the apartheid regime when talks were suspended, or do we go for the peaceful way of negotiations? And on many occasions, he knew that if you chose war, it would have far-reaching consequences, not only for the losers, but for the winners too. And we know from history throughout the world, where there was war, where there was civil war, and both parties and both sides of the conflict still deal with the burden of the past today. If you look at the Second World War, for instance, both the Germans and the Jewish population, they still carry that burden today of the past. So we should learn from that war is not the answer. Ordinary people can help force their leaders into peaceful negotiations. It's always up to democracy. It's always up to the will of the people. And people have incredible power, as we've seen with protest actions around the world, as they push for certain issues. People have power, and people are taking back that power. And politicians should know that they serve people and not the other way around. So I think we have all this incredible individual power, and Nelson Mandela taught that through his life. But by inspiring people, to forgive, to talk peace, by leading by example. It was easy for people in their ordinary lives also to follow that example. For instance, it was going to take one trigger-happy person in South Africa to start a civil war during negotiations, but because of the leadership of a person like Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, for that matter, because of the leadership examples we had, people did not do that. Ordinary people did not do that. So, I think that's a solution for the world's problems, is that we go back and we connect as humanity, that we focus on our common purpose. What is it that everyone wants on earth? They want prosperity, they want jobs, they want peace. And focus on that, because that's what everyone wants. President Bill Clinton always says that scientists have found that we share 99% DNA. So whatever the difference is, the color of our hair, our ethnicity, our religion, all of that, it's 1% differences. But we focus on the 1% rather than the 99% of similarities. So, there's many leaders across the world. It's not only Nelson Mandela. There's many leaders that we can learn from. We cannot be in 2024 in all these world wars and continue to allow self-serving politicians, to dump us all in crisis after crisis. Most of these wars are driven by men. Where are the women's voices in all of that? We need to really change society, and by bringing about that kind of equality and representation where people's voices are heard across the world.
Absolutely agree with you 100%. I had this conversation very recently, and I said, look, I've yet to find any wars in the last few hundred years that were started by female leaders. It's male leaders with big egos and power trips and aggression. And we do need more of a balance of empathy and compassion in our leadership. I really believe that. And the message that you have, Zelda, is just so powerful. I want the listener or the viewer now to know that Zelda actually speaks all around the world on stages to large audiences, small audiences. So if you'd like Zelda to come and share the wisdom that she has and that she also got from Nelson Mandela, please visit her website. I'll put the link in the show notes where you can then connect with Zelda's team and see if she's available to come and speak at your conference. I would love to have you here in New Zealand, and I'll get my team to connect with you actually to bring you across if you're available and keen to travel. because your message is amazing. I could sit here all day, and I know there will be a time when we do get to sit down for an entire day and do that. But Zelda, I want to ask you one last question before we part ways for now. I'd like you to imagine we're going to fast forward many, many years into the future, and you're highly aware that it's your last day here on Earth. And a very young person that you love dearly comes into the room and they say, Zelda, how do I go about living my life on purpose? What would you say to them?
It's going to be a long conversation. I hope I have time.
Absolutely.
But I would encourage them. I had this incredible life-changing experience with Nelson Mandela because I was open also to experiencing new things. I was open. I opened myself up to an opportunity despite the optics, at that point, being white, being Afrikaner, it's impossible that I work for someone like Nelson Mandela. I mean, those things to me wasn't as important than just having the job. Incredible things can happen to you if you open up to opportunity. The exposure I have had through Nelson Mandela and through working in that environment, being able to learn so much about life, about the world, about seeing things differently. That is the opportunity that came about because I opened myself up to this experience. So first of all, don't be blinded by your immediate environment. Think, we are so much better equipped because of smartphones. We are so much better equipped today, to fast track our experiences and to be more open to things. Don't allow artificial intelligence to control your world, because the AI just strengthens your position and it creates an echo chamber and so on. And that's very much like what happened in the almost stone age with me during Nelson Mandela's or before Nelson Mandela's time during apartheid. Your views get strengthened because all you read and see and so on strengthens your own point of view. So open yourself up to as much divergence as possible. Then I would say, one of the things I think Mr. Mandela taught me, and one of the things I heard him say most often over the years, was that it was easier for him to change others than it was to change himself. He realized in prison that unless he changed himself, unless he forgave first, unless he worked at his resentment first, he was not going to be able to unite the country. He was not going to be able to preach peace unless he had worked very hard on himself to change those things. So yes, he was an angry man when he went to prison and during prison, but this realization came through, through thinking about things, contemplating his problems, maybe meditation and so on. So, approach life like that. Don't always think of what you can change in other people. Always think of, have I changed sufficiently? Because none of us have. And until I'm at that moment that you described within my last day on earth, I hope that this young person can still teach me something. So, be self-aware. I think that is something that comes through Nelson Mandela's legacy, is being so self-aware of of people's experiences with you. I always think of, when I go to the store and I buy something, that the person taking my money, of course, there's all these racial lines in South Africa. So most of the people still working, in stores or providing services are still Black people, because our society is not, completely transformed yet. But in that moment, I realized that experience that person has on this particular time with me as a white person, that experience matters to that person. So, really thinking of life that way, and thinking of problems in a much deeper way, and looking at it from all different sides, like Nelson Mandela did. I think, that for us is a very enriching way of looking at life, and a fulfilling way of leading our own lives, because you feel like you feel like almost justified as a human being if you give someone the respect, even when you feel they don't deserve it. So there's lots of things like that. As I said to you, I hope it's a long conversation that last day. But there's so much to learn from the legacy of Nelson Mandela. I would encourage this person: read, read, read. Don't only spend time on social media. Read about the legacy, learn from the legacy of Nelson Mandela, because we need new leaders like him. We can't all be Nelson Mandelas. We can't go through all of that experience, but he's left us with this incredible legacy of teaching us so many different ways and solutions to problems. So I think that will be what I leave them with, or the person with them at the end.
That is such powerful wisdom, Zelda. I absolutely love it. And I know that there's going to be a listener that really needed to hear what you had to say with those last comments, because really we do need leaders that lead from the heart, and everything, I believe, rises and falls on leadership. So I just want to say a huge thank you for what you've done and what you continue to do in spreading the message and spreading the wisdom. And I really look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Thank you very much, James. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yes, and I do hope we meet in New Zealand. I've been to your country a few times on speaking engagements. And what I do through these speaking engagements is really humanize the person by using anecdotes of my experiences with Mr. Mandela, and advocating for respect and integrity and living an authentic life like he did. So I really hope to meet you somewhere on the speaking circuit. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. The Lead on Purpose podcast is made possible by our generous sponsor, NZ Mortgages. You can check them out at nzmortgages.co.nz.